Good morning, everyone. I'm Jason Marzak, Vice President and Senior Director of the Adrian Arch Latin America Center here at the Atlantic Council. Thank you for joining us for such a timely conversation. Rio Grande do Sul, Brazil's southernmost state, has been hit hard by torrential rains this month, leading to major flooding in most cities across the state. The equivalent of 5 months worth of typical precipitation fell in a mere 15 days in some areas. Underwater, in a state of emergency, hundreds of people have died, another 100 are missing, and thousands are displaced. Brazil has mobilized to offer support to those in Rio Grande do Sul, and so did the international community, with the United States, through USAID, announcing just this week an additional $800,000 in humanitarian assistance to the states. But the consequences of this disaster are still being accounted for, and the extent of the reconstruction will be massive. We are hosting this event now to shine a spotlight on Rio Grande do Sul and the urgent needs in the state. These are needs where the international community and individuals watching this event can jump in and help to make a difference. The unfortunate situation in Rio Grande do Sul is also a reminder of the urgent need for climate adaptation to be at the forefront of climate action and government's development plans. Today, we will hear from Governor Eduardo Leite on the humanitarian, economic, and social implications of this extreme event, followed by an expert panel with top practitioners on the issue of climate adaptation. But the case of Rio Grande do Sul should not be looked at in a silo. Extreme weather events have been a reality in many parts of the world, from floodings in Brazil and the United States to Asia's heat waves, and so many others. We will continue this event with that deeper conversation about the importance of adaptation and resilience. In partnership with the Adrian Arch Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center, this event delves deeper into one of the Atlantic Council's priorities around this year's G20 and next year's COP30, both hosted in Brazil. You can learn more about our G20 Brazil and climate work by visiting our website, atlanticcouncil.org, or following the hashtag ACBrazil. Now, to kick us off, I'm going to turn over to my colleague, Valentina Sader, Deputy Director and Brazil Lead at the Adrian Arch Latin America Center, to moderate a conversation with Governor Leite. Over to you, Valentina.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. It is an unfortunate context in which we bring Governor Eduardo Leite back to the Atlantic Council virtually this time. With a long career in government, Governor Eduardo Leite was elected governor of Rio Grande do Sul in 2018 as Brazil's youngest governor and re-elected in 2022 to lead Brazil's southernmost state of Rio Grande do Sul. Thank you, Governor Leite, for taking the time during this crisis to talk to us and to our audience today. From the Atlantic Council, we share our solidarity with the people of Rio Grande do Sul and wanted to be sure to spotlight the disaster that has hit Rio Grande do Sul and have a deeper conversation with the governor and climate experts on the humanitarian and economic consequences to the state, but also the lessons that Brazil and the world can take in terms of climate adaptation and resilience. Governor, to kick us off, I wanted to ask you, what is the situation in Rio Grande do Sul at the moment? What is the extent of these floods and the impact of these to the state?
So thank you all for looking to our state right now and this condition that we are passing through. And I would like first of all to apologize for my English, because there are so many meetings being held right now in so many subjects in Portuguese, for sure, with my staff and with the federal government and the municipalities, the private sector, all those that were affected, and with all those that are committed with the reconstruction of the state, that to stop here a little bit, to talk with you in English, it will be a little bit of a challenge for me right now, but it is very important for us, for everybody, to look for one moment to what is happening here, because for sure it is a huge alert for everybody around the world, and for sure for us here in Brazil and Latin America, because what took place here was for sure the worst climate disaster for our state, and even for Brazil. How would you measure climate disaster or catastrophe? For sure, you will take the number of deaths. That is an impact that is very hard for everybody. But it is more than that. In the number of deaths, you will see in Brazil other disasters that had many deaths more than what we had here in Rio Grande do Sul. We right now have around 160 people that lost their lives for this event in our state. But what took place here was huge in the extension, the number of cities that were hit by these floods. We have here 497 municipalities in Rio Grande do Sul. More than 400 were affected by this event. And many populated areas, such as the metropolitan area of the state capital, that is Porto Alegre, where I am right now, were affected, with more than 500,000 people that was dislocated, were taken from their places because of the floods or because of what would you call the deslizamentos, the
earth moving in a way that you have the
yeah, terrain moving from the mountains. Well, so right now we are still in the emergence, the urgent part of because the lake that is here, we have here the lagoon, a lagoon called Guaíba, that is where Porto Alegre and other cities in the metropolitan area are located, that it is still above the limit. So we are still passing through the flooding moment. Its level is going down, but it is still we still have areas that are flooded here in the cities around the metropolitan area. And the south part of the state, where the Lagoa dos Patos, the Patos Lagoon, is with its level above the limits, also with many areas, many cities with many areas that are under the water and flooded. And they are with severe rain predicted to happen. It's happening right now, and from today until tomorrow we will have severe rain there, what makes us to be afraid of more flooding for them. So this is the moment where we have people, around 70,000 people in shelters, taken care by the municipalities with the support of the state. We are working hard to help these shelters to be dignified spaces with quality, with food and harmonious space for those that are going to be there for the next weeks, until we can put these people for new homes, what will take some months, because we are working with the federal government to buy apartments that are already constructed, but for so many people we will have to project and to construct new homes, and for sure to reconstruct in a different way, respecting the conditions that the rivers and the lake showed for all, that must be changed. So we are working to take care of the people that were affected, to help them to rebuild and reconstruct their lives with many actions that are being done by the federal government, by the state government, and by the municipalities, and reconstructing the roads and bridges that were more affected in that are more important for us to reestablish the urgent conditions in the cities.
Governor, the images were impressive to see of the devastation, not only in Porto Alegre, but across the state of Rio Grande do Sul. 497 cities total, but more than 400 cities were impacted by this. As you mentioned, the state is underwater. But my question to you is, this is not the first time that Rio Grande do Sul was hit by torrential rains. How had the state adapted in the past to avoid climate disasters like these one? And what does it need to do now to avoid it happening again, ever?
Well, we do not ignore any alert and the studies that science shows us about what is happening in the world and how it will reach our state. So in the last decade, the state passed through many years of severe drought that has hit our plantations for rice, for soy, making us to lose much of our production here in the agriculture. So we have been working at a certain point to deal with these conditions of severe drought. But last year, we started to be hit by these events with severe rains. Last year, one of the regions here in the state that's called the Taquari Valley, that is one of our rivers and the cities around it in this valley, had a catastrophe, a disaster from rains and floodings that made us to be even more alert and to start a new path to deal with that. We have installed a climate crisis cabinet in our government and contracted new technologies such as a new weather radar for the state that didn't have the time to reach us to get here before these last events, but it is already arriving for us here to be installed, this new technology for predictions in the weather, for us to better analyze the conditions and to give better and more efficient alerts for those that are in the regions that have more risks in our states. So another thing that we did here is the state government is a supporter with finance, with money to the municipalities for many areas where the mayors asks us to support them. One example is to pavement for the streets in the municipalities. They ask us for support them with money for those investments. So what we started in the state last year, I signed a decree putting a demand for those mayors that want our support for them in investments for constructions and pavement and road pavement. We demand the municipalities to present us their climate change commissions in the municipalities. Each city that want to receive money from the government has to organize their the city commission for climate change, and also for receiving money from our what we call the civil defense, that it is the uh, structure from governments to deal with these climate catastrophes. Um, for the municipalities to receive our money, they have to present us also their contingency plan for each event. And these helped us for in this last event to have a lower number of deaths in the cities that were hit last year by the rains, for example, in this Taquari Valley where I talked about. We had in this event the river reached a level much more high, a much higher level in the cities, but we had there less deaths, a lower number of deaths, because the cities were alerted, and the cities have constructed and have built their contingency plan for events like that to evacuate the areas that could be reached. So there are many actions that are being done here in the state, but for sure the condition that this event brought to us show us that we have to be even stronger in those actions, and for sure much faster, because it is happening with a frequency that will demand us much more investment and much more to be much more faster here to deal with that.
And an impressive coordinated effort as well in terms of federal government, state government, and local authorities as well. Governor, to wrap us up, Brazil has mobilized to help Rio Grande do Sul, but how can our audience and the international community help support Rio Grande do Sul now and in its reconstruction efforts, which are going to be very, very large?
Well, for those that want to help us with financing solutions, there are paths for that are being presented by the government. We have a fundraising for a campaign named the SOS Rio Grande do Sul, with banking channels that are available nationally and internationally for deposits. But I would say with this audience that you have here, that are many technical supports that can be offered for the state. We are working hard to have this technical support for building the better solutions for the state. There are many solutions being presented in many areas, and what concerns us more is to reconstruct in a different way, especially those communities that are connected to the rivers. So we cannot only think about taking them from that place and putting them in another place, because many of them are very related even to the rivers. We could talk, for example, about the fishermen in some areas that must be near or related to the rivers and to the lagoons, but we will have to think and to build these solutions in a way where their lives and their homes can resist for any other climate conditions that can happen here. So we are with a special attention for what took place in the Katrina hurricane event, for example, or in the floodings in Netherlands or other regions of the world where nations or states or municipalities had to deal with these reconstructions to take their knowledge and expertise for us, but for sure, those that want to offer this expertise and knowledge are very welcome for us. We, in our Rio Grande plan, how we call our, what would be our Marshall Plan, the post-war phase for Europe, we say that we here we will face right now a reconstruction phase where that could be related for those for a post-war, like the Marshall Plan worked for Europe. Our Rio Grande plan that was approved yesterday in our state parliament here, the state assembly, is there we have a council with the society to discuss and implement the actions that must be done here. And we have a scientific committee would be for better understand and to process the solutions that will show us the path that shall be taken for the state. So I would say that technical knowledge and expertise are very welcome for us to be discussed here and maybe implemented for these regions that where we can see higher level of risks.
Governor Leite, thank you so much. I think this is the perfect segue into our next conversation about climate adaptation and resilience in particular with technical experts. So thank you again for taking the time to talk to us. Good luck on your effort to reconstruct Rio Grande do Sul, and again, our solidarity to the people of Rio Grande do Sul. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for all those that are mobilizing all efforts to help Rio Grande do Sul. We have here a very strong state, and I'm pretty sure we will be stronger from this event, but we will be stronger with the support from many people and institutions such as you are doing right now. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor Leite. With that, I would like to transition to my colleague, Nidhi Upadhyaya. She's the Deputy Director for Global Policy and Finance at the Adrian R. Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center for a conversation with experts on climate adaptation. Nidhi, over to you.
Thank you, Valentina, and thank you, Governor, for joining us for this excellent conversation. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone tuning in. I am Nidhi Upadhyaya, Deputy Director of the Adrian R. Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center. Our center aims to reach the most vulnerable communities with adaptation and resilient solutions by working with local government officials, the private finance sector, civil society organizations, and through global policy processes. The torrential rains and floods in Rio Grande do Sul has brought to the forefront the discussion and now hopefully increased action on climate adaptation. The actions we all need to take to prepare and protect our communities. I know we have limited time here, so I would like to jump right into the conversation with our speakers. Let me briefly introduce them. Priscilla Negrores is a senior manager at Climate Policy Initiative, where she leads the city's Climate Finance Leadership Alliance, a platform for cooperation, partnerships, and advocacy in subnational climate finance. CCFLA works to ensure that finance will be deployed at scale for city-level climate action by 2030 by focusing on establishing a bridge between demand and supply for city-level climate-related finance with cities, national governments, DFIs, and private investors. I've had the opportunity to work with Priscilla on various occasions, and it is great to have you here sharing your thoughts. Renata Koch Alvarenga is a leading voice on gender and climate justice in the global youth movement. She founded the youth-led and Brazil-based organization Empodera Clima at 22 years old to raise awareness of the need for women's empowerment in climate decision-making spaces, and advocated for girls' education and climate action in the Global South more specifically in Latin America and the Caribbean. She currently works as a disaster risk financing specialist at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining, Renata. Guilherme Sirquish is Executive Director of the Brazil Climate Center and has previously served as Special Advisor to the Minister of Mines and Energy. He has also served on the Board of Directors of the Manaus Free Trade Zone to evaluate and recommend investments in the Amazon. Thank you for joining, Guilherme, and looking forward to the conversation with you all. First things first. This is to everyone because I know you all have close ties or colleagues or friends in the region. How are you all doing? How's your family doing? How are your friends doing? How are your colleagues doing? Because I think in this conversation, we have to be mindful that this is affecting people as we speak. And I have 3 of you here, so I'd love to hear just opening comments on how it's going. Priscilla, over to you first.
Great. Thank you so much, Nidhi, and thank you so much, the Atlantic Council, for organizing this event. As every Brazilian, I'm very moved for what's going on in Rio Grande do Sul. My family is from a city called Montenegro. My mom and actually my grandma turned 92 the day that they closed the airport. So although everyone is very well, some of them lost their homes, jobs, and if not, beloved people. And this is pretty much the case for every citizen in Rio Grande do Sul. So it's hard to see someone in the state and in the region that hasn't been directly or indirectly affected. So I think the fact that Atlantic Council is organizing this discussion, showcasing stories, understanding the causes and consequences, and making sure that we're going to rebuild Rio Grande do Sul in a different way and learn the lessons for this is very much important, not only for Brazil, but worldwide. So yes, thank you for the question. And
thank you, Priscilla. Renata?
Thank you, Nidhi. It's great to be here. Of course, I wish it was under better circumstances. I was born and raised in Porto Alegre, in the capital of the southernmost state in Brazil, of Rio Grande do Sul. So that's where my heart is right now. That's where my family is. That's where all my friends are. And so what I would say is that my loved ones are safe, but they're not okay. I think it's hard to say, to make this statement, right? That people are well. Many of the people I know back in Rio Grande do Sul either don't have access to water or just got access to water and clean sanitation or access to electricity, energy, the internet, basic rights, right? And things that people need to keep going. And of course, there's so many people that had to relocate from their homes, people I know, people that I work with my NGO. So it's a very challenging time. And I just wanted to quickly flag, as someone that has been working in this space, in the climate adaptation, climate justice, disaster risk financing space, I can say that for us, we're used to these heavy rains, right? It happens every so often, to these eventual floods. It's actually one of the most common disasters that we have in the region. But what we're seeing right now is not only an unprecedented disaster in the region to the point that it's affected so much of our state, but unfortunately, what we also have seen is that our systems, including our governments, are not prepared for it, right? We're seeing that there's been a neglect of the alerts of things happening, and we'll discuss more, I'm sure, but I hope that we can, with the situation, this horrible situation that's happening, we can finally start seeing the situation for what it is, which is a climate disaster, a climate emergency.
Thank you so much, Renata. Guilherme, tell us how things are on your end.
Yeah, we are very sad about everything. We work really close with the Eduardo Leite's team. We have been developing work with them for almost 5 years, and what happened is unprecedented. It's really touching. We also have a collaborator that lives there that we brought here to Rio de Janeiro. And now we need to think how to reconstruct all of this with resilience. And that's the point, and we're gonna love to discuss now with all of you.
Thank you so much. So Priscilla, the first question that I have for you is, as you mentioned also, this disaster's impact has opened our eyes to what the future holds, not just for Brazil, but for the world. Are you seeing the conversation around climate adaptation gaining momentum following this disaster? If so, how are you seeing it change? And are you seeing more action a bigger role of the private sector? If not just yet, what do you think should be the role of private sector?
Thank you, Nidhi. Big question. I think on adaptation, I'm going to focus more on the finance aspect of it. So adaptation finance lacks and continue to lag all around. So while adaptation, it has reached a high, let's say, in terms of investment globally, all-time high is like $63 billion last year. So 2021, 2022, according to data from CPI and the global landscape, is still far short from the needs that it's around the needs that we estimate today around 250 billion. And I could even say that it's going to be a lot more than that because there are infrastructures that we don't even know that we will need to build. So some characteristics of it is that most of this financing are coming from the public sector still. So there are flows from the private sector, but they're very fragmented. And what we can see is that most of these flows still go for developed economies. So the distribution is very unequal. But the conversation, although is gaining momentum, I think what we need to put a lot of emphasis and focus on is the cost of not adapting. So basically the cost of inaction. And I think we are seeing this with the example of Rio Grande do Sul, but also other cities around the world, including in Brazil, of how much it has cost to actually face a disaster instead of adapting. And like coastal cities, just as a very quick example, lose already around 600 billion every year due to extreme flooding. So it's already happening around the globe. And even like another example, just from Brazil on Petrópolis, which is a city close to Rio, where they had a lot of like landslides, mudslides, and floods in February 2022. It has cost just for the business. They have an estimation of around $131 million. So the cost of inaction is huge, and we need to make an effort from it. So in terms of that, like very quickly answer on your point from the private sector, I think private sector is a very big word, right? Like there are many different types of actors that are private, including companies themselves, including investors, including insurances. And we are living a global climate disaster. So everyone has a role to play. I think in terms of, let's say, companies, and this is also a case we're seeing in Rio Grande do Sul, we need to have companies internally adapting, meaning climate proofing their own internal operations, supply chains, and addressing those risks. On the investment side, there is a big, big role to play from the financial markets in terms of like finding solutions and changing the perception that money is not made by adaptation, investing into technologies, and working on solutions that can actually have to tackle what is happening right now. So I think in terms of challenges, we have a couple around bringing up the private sector into the table, but we already see some solutions out there. So we have models, financial models of blended finance, where you use public investments to try to mitigate the risk. So like helping companies and private sector investments to come into this market. And we also see already very interesting even investor and equity funds that are focusing their works on adaptation and actually having a long profit and a big profit over that. So there are ways to go, but I think we need a lot more consultation internationally around the climate finance adaptation market and to make it more accessible, because we don't have time to lose. And we can definitely see that in Brazil right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Priscilla. There's no time to lose. Renata, women are often the ones that bear the burden of dealing with disasters and climate change. What kind of climate adaptation solutions do you think need to be in place to make communities more resilient, especially women, because they're bearing the brunt of taking care of not just themselves, their families, their communities. So could you shed some light on that?
Thank you, Nidhi. Definitely. I think this is such an important question because at the end of the day, the climate crisis, the disaster that we're seeing right now in Rio Grande do Sul, they're about people, right? Natural hazards, they happen from time to time, meteorological, climatological, floods, storms, all of that stuff. But what makes it a climate disaster is when it's combined, when these climate disasters are combined with human vulnerability, right? Which is what we're seeing right now. And as you mentioned, women are one of the groups that are most affected. This is about centering inequality, right? Inequality, as we know in society, is a structural issue. So of course, in the context of a shock, for example, such as these disasters that we're seeing, inequalities related to gender, class, race, etc., they are exacerbated, which means the situation gets worse for them. The poor disproportionately usually live in areas that have a higher environmental vulnerability, whether it's in areas that get more pollution and therefore your water is contaminated, whether you live in an area that's on a cliff and therefore you have landslides and you lose your home. So these are the people that suffer the most. And I want to be clear here because there's been debates around this, but this does not mean this inequality, this vulnerability that we're talking about. It doesn't mean that only those that are most marginalized in society are affected by the disaster, right? That's not true. What we're seeing is that many people are facing insecurity right now in Rio Grande do Sul, no matter their background. So that's precisely what makes this disaster so unprecedented. It's everywhere. It sees no barrier, right? However, we do have added burdens brought by social injustice, social environmental injustices. So indigenous peoples, for example, are groups that are a lot of times they're closer to nature and therefore are the first ones to face that vulnerability to climate change. Quilombola communities, we're seeing that right now in Rio Grande do Sul. For example, 98% or so, a little bit more, of Quilombos in Brazil are threatened by infrastructure projects, by the mining industry. So imagine they already have this kind of set challenges in their homes, in their communities. And then, of course, when there's a climate shock, this just gets worse and worse. And so with gender specifically, super important to highlight that the climate crisis is not gender neutral. Women and girls experience some of the greatest impacts of climate change. Women are usually, especially in Brazil, they're the majority of the heads of households. So of course, there's added responsibilities and burdens when they have to, for example, relocate their homes. And so we have seen this in Rio Grande do Sul, women reporting sexual abuse, for example, gender-based violence in shelters where they are to be protected, to be safe after they had to leave their homes, the places they've grown up, they've been in their whole lives. And there's a lot of women that have also reported being abandoned by their partners during these floods, right? And so in terms of what you said of climate adaptation measures that can be responsive to these issues, to these gender-based violence issues, it really needs to include these people in the solution. It needs to include the most marginalized groups in the conversations, in the decision-making, right? This should have been thought of in advance of this disaster. I saw that the state government met with the Ministry of Women of the federal government of Brazil to discuss some protocols and this post-emergency scenario, but moving forward, it's really important that we highlight, especially for climate adaptation, that there's a role for women's active participation in these conversations, in disaster preparedness, in the response process, in the leadership that we really don't see, right? So just to wrap it up, I wanted to highlight all of this reconstruction strategies, disaster preparedness, climate adaptation policies, they need to be locally owned, they need to be community driven, and therefore these communities need to be included in the process. We have better environmentally friendly agreements, we have better climate adaptation policies when we have diversity in the decision making and in the solutions. So I think that's what went wrong in this case, and I hope that we can mainstream that more and more moving forward.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Quickly moving on to Guilherme. In what ways can state and local governments be more effective in incorporating climate resilient and adaptation measures in comparison to the federal government?
So it's very important to highlight some numbers. Only 3 out of Brazil, 27 states, and about only 3 have a adaptation plan. When it comes to cities, only 30 out of more than 5,000 municipalities have climate adaptation plans. These local insights helps to prioritize vulnerable areas that need urgent attention. But let's break it down to understand how to be effective and really save lives. I think one, governance and political will. Local government should integrate climate adaptation into every aspect of planning and development. When the Public Works Department plans a new bridge, they need to consider climate change. The Housing Department should assess disaster risk for new housing projects and think about solutions like painting houses white to reduce heat. City master plan must include climate resilience as a key part of their strategy. Second, local capacity building. Local government can also engage the community and universities and develop local skills to solve problems effectively and with innovation. Also, this includes setting up well-structured emergency response units to help people during the crisis. We also need to establish an intelligence and a monitoring agency, like in my city, Rio de Janeiro's Operation Center, which monitors rain, heat, the traffic, and the major events, with all service providers in the city working together in one place to assess systemic risk. This is a very important word, systemic risk. Third, catalytic money and blended finance. My colleague already talked a little bit. So state and local government can better direct financial resources by focus on sustainable infrastructure projects. So for example, the Growth Acceleration Program, the so-called PAC in Brazil, Brazil's largest federal infrastructure program, still allocate around 65% of its investment to fossil fuels. So let's use this money, which is being structured with a program, to channel more funds from the MDBs, the GCF, the CIF. And the last, fourth, this new concept that everyone is talking about, the sponge cities. There is no doubt that we'll need to undertake major projects like building dikes, dams, reinforcing slopes, strengthening sand barriers to contain the ocean advance. But our cities are too addicted to concrete. Local government can lead by investing in resilient infrastructure like the sponge cities, which use nature-based solutions like reforestation riverbanks, creating parks to absorb flood waters and improve air quality. By taking this step, states and local government can demonstrate successful resilience strategy that can be scaled up and used as a model for federal policy, influence a broader decision and funding allocation.
Thank you so much, Guilherme. I mean, that's really, really helpful. I know we're short on time, so one final question to all three of you. And let's do a quick round. G20 is happening in Brazil this year. COP30 is happening in Brazil next year. How do you think we need to use these platforms to advance greater commitments, and more than commitments, greater action in terms of climate adaptation? And then slightly related to that, what lesson can the world learn from this disaster? So I'll turn it over to Renata first this time.
Sounds good. Thank you. It's a huge opportunity that cannot go to waste, right? Having G20 in Brazil, having COP30 in Brazil, there's no agenda that's more important than climate action right now. I say this with confidence as someone that has been navigating this UN COP spaces for almost 10 years now and seeing a lack of urgency, right? And so we need to leverage this time that we have on the spotlight as a country, as Latin America, as well as the Global South, to not only talk about the finance that we need for these extreme climate events, but also for these climate funds to be delivered quickly, and for us to get over this debate of the level of responsibility of each country or business or institution who pays for this damage, right? Let's get into the next step. So that's what I'd say. And then in terms of the lesson, really, really need to emphasize preparedness is the best investment that any government can make, that any country can make. Let's leverage these spaces. We know that disasters are no longer rare and uncommon, right? We need to operate assuming that they will happen, not if they will, but rather when these disasters will happen, right? And just to finish off, one of my professors in my master's, Juliette Kayem, she had a quote. She works a lot on disaster preparedness and efficient response. And she says, if everything is a crisis, that means you haven't solved the larger public policy problem. So we can't operate waiting for the next disaster to then solve, to then reconstruct. That's expensive, that's costly, and that doesn't work for climate justice. So we need to start operating, changing our public policies and leveraging these international spaces to cry for help, to talk about what we need to be done now for climate adaptation and resilience.
Thank you so much, Renata. Priscilla, over to you.
Great, echoing Renata in all of her points that I agree. I wanted to add one point. I think for Brazil, it's a huge opportunity to actually host one of the two big discussions globally that in the country. And I think what I see a bit of a lack of the discussions around the role of cities. And I think we have an opportunity to highlight the role of cities on adaptation specifically, and how we need more financing to that level. Because I think that the example of Rio Grande do Sul is quite clear. We had more than 425 municipalities, and I think the governor mentioned this, that were affected, and they will be the ones, these mayors, these citizens, actually facing and having to reconstruct their lives. And actually, they should be the ones, these groups, the cities, the ones that we are thinking about while we are discussing the reform of multilateral development banks. What is the role of vertical and climate and environmental funds? How can we actually build these institutions in a way that they are more effective to work with the actors that are actually going to implement most of these changes? And municipalities now are struggling a lot with their fiscal abilities, the enabling environment, the market, the poor market environment, and this flows are not getting where they should. So I think for Brazil, leading this agenda as a country that is extremely urbanized, as a country that is a leadership, is also in the region, is a huge opportunity for us to show a very practical message on how adaptations change will happen. So yes, that's I think will be my main message. Thank you,
Thank you
Nidhi.
so much, Priscilla. Guilherme, last word.
So I think Brazil is doing a good homework when it comes about international policy, focus on the G20 and the COP30. But I would like to focus in our homework inside of the country. We face 25 bills in Congress known as the destruction package that undermines environmental responsibility. Our main task in Brazil is to elect a Congress that understands and prioritize environmental issues. We also deeply concerned about the upcoming US elections. If Donald Trump returns to power, it could further food denialism in Brazil, given how these elections directly impact our polarized political landscape. And we need to make voters understand why these topics are important, help them see that environmental policies are crucial for their daily lives. But how do we effectively convince them? Unfortunately, narratives often overshadow facts. And when this happens, imagination reshapes reality. This is a $1 trillion question. We saw this during the COVID pandemic, and it's the challenge we continue to face. So the international community should take this and really focus on it. And again, the inaction cost is so much more huge than to plan and do differently. Let's do it.
Thank you so much. This has been a very short but very, very valuable conversation with all of you. Thank you for being here. And thank you to the Asian Arts Latin America team for setting up this event with us. This has been very, very insightful. I'm going to leave the audience with this, which I know every speaker has already mentioned. The cost of inaction on adaptation and resilience is going to put the world in a very, very, very difficult place. And the only solution is to join hands, scale effective and efficient solutions, and make impactful investments. So thank you all for joining. Thank you to the audience who is listening in. You heard how you can help Rio Grande do Sul. Please reach out if you have any questions, but thank you all for joining.
Quiero que aunque norte y sur sean distintos, lleven un mismo latido en el ritmo, como quien comparte el mismo apellido, porque al fin y al cabo somos latinos. Quiero que la unión que logra la fuerza rompa divisiones y abra más puertas. Quiero que entendamos que cuando todos sumamos se hace la diferencia. Diversos como hay palabras en el diccionario, todos los significados usan el mismo abecedario. Yo soy como tú eres como